Okay. So just to give a bit of context before we start, I just first of all wanted to thank the Metta Valley Wellness Center for having me, and Sharon for accepting us here and welcoming me and my family, and everyone also for welcoming us into this space. So just for, oh man, there's a lot of context, but I shouldn't go into too much of it now. But basically, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and I ordained after college and ordained in the Thai forest tradition in Thailand under the lineage of Ajahn Chah, and which is sort of the lineage that Jack Kornfield and that whole group kind of came from, more or less. And then I've been a monk for 8 years and just came back to the US. I arrived on election night, so that was fun. And so since then, I've been at a hermitage down near Portland, and will probably be going to live in Seattle and looking into starting a monastery there called Clear Mountain Monastery. But my parents, one of who is present, Douglas Robnett, they are longtime practitioners as well, and retired early to come to the Metta Valley, where we've had a connection for many years. They used to take us here skiing, cross-country skiing every winter. So, and it's always been quite close to our hearts. So they wanted to create a refuge for monastics, monks and nuns, to come and go on long-term retreat. So they, with several other practitioner couples, bought a piece of land out by Wolf Creek, just maybe 10 minutes away, something like that. And the goal is to build 2 monastic retreat kutis there, where monks and nuns from every lineage from across the world can kind of come and practice on long-term retreat for a few months at a time, and hopefully offer teachings. And a house which will double as a meditation hall. And at that home, once it's built, the idea would be that there would be free teachings offered regularly by whatever monastics were present. And on especially every Sunday, and this will be going forward, every Sunday from basically now onward at 9:30 a.m. we'll be gathering here for a sort of monastic teaching and potluck meal offering every week from about 9:30 to 11:30. So there'll be a brief sit, then a meal offering where everyone gets to share a meal and meet and talk, and then some Dhamma reflections as well. And I'll be here at what we're calling the Cascade Hermitage for the next month and a half. And so I'll be here every Sunday at 9:30 with the family and with the whole group of practitioners, whoever wants to come. And the goal is to sort of, see if those who are interested want to participate, and just to have that. Once I leave in July, they'll still have it, but I won't be there. But other monastics will be live streaming in and such. And also, my monastic lineage is in the Thai forest tradition. So it's a monastic lineage focused on meditation and dwelling in solitude. It holds a fairly strict code of monastic conduct. So we don't use money. We eat once a day in the mornings. We can't store food. So we basically walk for alms every day, or receive alms every day, and that's how we eat. So the idea was to do some of that here, and every Saturday at the farmers market in Twisp, I'll be going for alms at about 10 a.m. So you might see me around there. And basically that's just a chance for people who are interested to speak and offer food if they want. And I think that's enough initial context, but the idea would be, just I think the parents will be here going forward, and I'll be coming at the end of every month, the last weekend, to help lead a retreat for a free 2-day retreat here as well. So that'll be every month after June, or starting in June, every month the last weekend. And all this can be found at the website for their place called cascadehermitage.org. So that's a lot of context and enough of that. So sorry, but I wanted to kind of give a bit of that. And then, yeah, I heard now we do a group meditation, and then after that we have a time for a talk and maybe a bit of Q&A. Yeah, okay, well, let's do that. So begin by setting your body erect and drawing in the lower spine, the lumbar, and then move your awareness slowly, vertebrae by vertebrae, up the spine, as if you're stringing a string of pearls, one on top of the other. Move up to the top of the head and imagine a thin string suspending the top of your head and your whole body so that it sits erect but relaxed. And intuitively, you can think of sitting with dignity. Widen the chest, soften the neck, lower the chin slightly, soften the well at the base of the neck slightly. And feel any tension that you have in your eyes or jaw and relax that. Now take 3 very deep breaths all the way into the depth of the belly and hold it for a little bit, and then release it as slowly as you can. Now just find a rhythm of breath that feels comfortable. You can adjust it slightly if you want. And one difficulty with how breath meditation is sometimes taught as bringing awareness to one point is that coming out of an active day, the mind wants more than that. It's a bit like telling a classroom full of third graders to sit down and take a test when they're still running around. So it's useful to approach breath meditation in a more active way at first until the mind settles. And in the Buddhist conception, the breath is more the breath energy. So we can use visualizations to move this energy through the body and become skilled at using it. So as you breathe in, imagine the breath as light coming in down through the back of the skull, coursing down the spine, down the right leg if you're a male and the left leg if you're a female, and out the foot. And you don't have to time that exactly with the breath, just let the visualization progress as it would naturally. And then imagine that golden or white light coming in again through the base of the skull, coursing down through the spine, down through the left leg and out through the left foot. Now imagine the breath coming in through the base of the skull, down over both shoulders and out along the arms and through the hands. And then imagine it coming in through the base of the throat, coursing down through the center of the chest, and ending right below the diaphragm. And finally, imagine it coming in right at a point about 2 finger breadths above the navel. A white mist coming in there with the inhale. And then allow the awareness to encompass the whole body. But if at one point becomes more prominent than the others, usually the tip of the nose or the chest, allow it to center and rest there, feeling the breath, but remaining aware of the whole field of the body, like a spider resting at the center of a web, but aware of the whole web. But frequently it'll take the mind some time to get that calm. So until then, you can continue along this circuit of visualizations if you want. Although you're welcome to do whatever meditation exercise you want at this time. So that's down through the base of the skull, down the spine, out one leg, in through the base of the skull, down the spine, out the other, in through the base of the skull, along both shoulders, down the arms and out through the hands, in through the base of the throat, down into the chest, and then in through a space about 2 finger breadths above the navel, and then expanding awareness to hold the whole body. And if the mind wanders, just gently, smilingly bring it back like you would a puppy. And this is in line with the 3rd step of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, which directs us to become aware of the whole body of the breath. And each of these visualizations is a way of reacquainting our body, our minds with the body. Because as Westerners, we tend to think of our bodies as these things that keep our necks from dragging on the ground. And for meditation to go anywhere, usually we need to become reacquainted with it. So the end goal is that full-bodied field of awareness with the mind carefully tracking one point usually the tip of the nose, like you would a silk thread. But first, until we've reacquainted ourselves with the body, it's useful to use these very active visualizations to draw the awareness down into the torso from the head. So feel free to play with that for a time or do what you would like. And as the mind circles into calm, kind of like a dog circling its bed before it lies down, and it finds that point where the breath feels most prominent in the body, like the tip of the nose, and really try to keep that awareness continuous with that point, even as you keep the whole body in the periphery, as if you're tracking a silk thread, and pay special attention to the point right between the inhalation and the exhalation, trying to remain aware even through that subtle moment. And the more active visualizations you can let fade whenever they become too much, just let them go. Remain with the breath. Now take a second just to acknowledge the heart. Bring attention to that. The burden it tends to carry day after day, trying to make ends meet and meet the demands of everyone around us. And the constant and unceasing demands we place on it without really ever letting it rest. So now just let it rest for a while and hold it in compassion. And warmth. And if it helps, because we tend to have a lot of difficulty feeling compassion for ourselves, imagine someone who cares deeply for you, gazing at you with love, like they would, wishing you happiness, looking at you like you know that they can. And feel that gaze and try to feel that for yourself. And imagine that warmth. And you can name it if you want. Love, tenderness, care, listening. And let that kindle the warmth of metta, of loving kindness in the heart. And let that small ember grow, holding yourself in a moment of care, which you may have waited a long time for without giving. And in Buddhism, this is the directive of the First Noble Truth, to turn towards and comprehend our suffering, and to place our hands carefully on it, and to know it. Because until we do that, then everything else is motivated by running from it. So just be with that for yourself for a time. And if it helps, you can imagine a ball of white light around the heart as well, with the breath. And as it grows, you can, instead of sending it out to those you love, because that tends to dissipate the warmth of loving kindness. Instead, this sounds strange, but it works. Shrink the people and bring them into your heart and let them be there with it in that field of metta. And that lets it keep its power without dissipating. Now just take a second to think of those you love and those who have passed or who you've lost. And just dedicate the goodness of coming to practice to them. This isn't a selfish thing. When we have some measure of centeredness and peace, then we can actually offer ourselves to others instead of just trying to control them. So meditation is a great gift to those we love. And it's very rare that people are interested in it. So take a chance to dedicate the goodness to those people. And also to feel held by this other group of practitioners who also see the value in this family that you've all cultivated here. The Buddhist word for spiritual friend is Kalyana, which means beautiful friend.
I think it's okay if you take your mask off.
Yeah? I'm vaccinated for what it's worth.
All of us are.
So now we take a 5-minute break usually.
Yeah, usually, often some more people will come in a little 5 minutes or.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah, feel free to take a 5-minute break and we can reconvene.
Do you think there's a chair? Have a chair for that?
I like this one, but thank you.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's vaccinated.
I wanted to keep that goal right before the fire. And I didn't have it. And so then I was it's just, you know, all new this. Don't worry about it. So it's like, in the room, you have to like, but we have some friends first. And I'm sure that ran it. Anyway. Yeah, and then, and I did put it out as a color. You know, the good thing, yeah. Interesting. She'll kind of make out. Did you told her you well, you know her, I get that. I don't get mine. For those two. And so it's just, it's the. You know, we have to, we're not here. Look at the meditation. And the sun is rare. It's at the ranch house. Steven yeah, it's kind of near the store. Yeah, I know. The Santa Country Inn. Yes.
It's kind of funny now, you know, I'm probably back here. At least for a while. You know, it's so easy. Yeah.
For me,
And so
I tell you where I was at John Newman when we rocket over. It was like chubby, young. No, it was last one. What do you do all the time? Are you at Terry's? I don't know, right? Several places there. Yeah, Chicken Creek. Yeah, they were. Really, I noticed that today. Oh, they make potatoes. Next door to Farmer State Bank, there was a storefront for a long time. So there's certain cars, track. City trucks are good. And, wow, so the truck,
Yeah.
we're trained.
Do you do it?
Chat for 2 hours. We haven't been in person very much.
It's kind of nice to have everyone meet again, is the thing.
I know it's.
It's been a while. All right, wait, I'll try it. Wow, the power. I've got to get one of these. Yeah. It's a fun bell. Yeah. In Thailand, they have a gigantic wooden bell with this huge thing, and they would like ring it about 3 a.m. in the morning, and you just see monks kind of sprinting for the hall, trying to get there in time. So, okay. Usually we go to around 8-ish. Is that correct? Okay, great. Okay, so maybe we'll do a brief talk and then some Q&A or something like that. Okay. Oops. I don't really know how to use this thing. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, yeah, once again, wanted to thank everyone for having me, my parents, and everyone, Sharon. And I'm Tan Nisabho, monk Nisabho, and the Chantadistit is a traditional way that monastics in our tradition have of, and most traditions actually have, of beginning any talk. And it's a homage to the triple gem of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And I thought I could take that as a bit of the subject of the reflections tonight because it contextualizes me a bit, which I'm a bit of an anachronism here. So in the West, I just got back home, so sort of navigating this and trying to explain what exactly all this means. And the triple gem, as it's called, is the three objects in which Buddhists traditionally take refuge. And the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So the homage to that is an acknowledgement of that as a refuge for myself, at least, and offering up any reflections that come to that. And I think this can come across to sort of more secular audiences as can much of my outfit perhaps, and you know, a lot of this whole thing as strange and difficult to understand. So I think it's helpful to look at what those three refuges really mean and what they're really pointing to. So the refuge in the Buddha is provisionally pointing to the teacher Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, and 2,500 years ago in India. And there's something to be said for that, much to be said for that. The teachings laid down by the Buddha, I think the Sutta Pitaka is 22,000 pages. It's 12 times the length of the Bible. It's an extremely extensive document. And the Buddha dedicated his life to teaching the way out of suffering for 45 years after he became awakened, at least in the Buddhist conception. And the teachings were extremely concise, steered clear of ontological truths as much as possible, and focused on the practical means by which one could shape one's mind and heart to let go of suffering, and only on that. And the idea was that when one could liberate the heart, then that benefited society as a whole. But the deeper meaning of that refuge, and what I think it's perhaps most usefully looked at, is the concept of the transcendent in the human being and of human potential as a whole. And I think that's something that our society is maybe more hungry for than it knows, but that we also have an intuition for. And in Thailand, the traditional meditation object is the word Buddho, which means awake. And there's a story in the Buddha's lifetime when a Brahmin encounters him and asks if he's a god, and he responds, no. Are you a man? No. He says, any basically conception by which I might be construed as one of these or the other has been cut off, destroyed at the root. Think of me as awakened. And I think Buddho is perhaps best looked at in terms of that as almost an adjective, as awake, or a noun, awaken. And I don't think this has to be taken as some ontological truth, but just the acknowledgement that there's something in the human heart which, if cultivated, can allow a Tibetan monk imprisoned by Chinese for 20 years emerge from that experience with the greatest fear of his only being that he would lose love for his captors, and that did not happen. And the fact that there's something in the human heart that is so immutable that it can resist conditions even that brutal is, for me, the concept of transcendence in a way that we can all understand and appreciate. And I think that one of the most powerful motivators for me entering and remaining in robes was, and the monastic life is not not everyone's going to be a monk or a nun, but just to say my path was, it was the right path for me, and it was largely determined by meeting men and women who I felt had done something in their hearts which I had never seen and which I'd been so hungry for as a lay person. You hear stories of Desmond Tutu, of the Dalai Lama, and they seem like these faraway things. But when you meet someone who really seems to have let go of every defilement and stain of selfishness in their heart, it shakes you. And I think that's appropriate, because when we have a true conception of what we are capable of as human beings, I think that should reorient a life. And I think one of the difficulties with modern society is that we don't always have this conception of the transcendent or of the worthy North Star of a life held clearly. Most of the traditions and the canopies of meaning which our society's relied on for so long have been swept away. And I think that much of the political polarization and difficulty which society has now is because those things are gone. And yet I think the acknowledging of a transcendent potential in all of us is the beginning point in discovering that meaning. And in some ways, I think this is as simple as, for so long, the Western paradigm has been in psychology, for example, to just get people to a modicum of well-being. I think Freud famously said in The Interpretation of Dreams that the best I can do is change your neurotic misery into normal human unhappiness. And the DSM-4 had 1,999 pages dedicated towards problems, mental illness, and I think half a page dedicated towards mental well-being. I think the DSM-5 did a little better. They had 150 pages dedicated to mental well-being. But when you look, for example, at the Buddhist language around these things, or language contained in many traditions, Islam, Christianity, but I'm obviously particularly acquainted with the Buddhist languaging, it articulates the bright states and the bright potential of the human mind in a detail I have never seen in the West. The 7 enlightenment factors, the different conceptions of the loving kindness meditations, the Brahma Viharas, as we call them, the boundless abodes. And you see what a measure of peace in the mind does in infusing that mind with power and love and a resonance with the highest potential we all have. And I think one of the difficult things to explain after you begin practicing is why you're leaving the dinner party half an hour early to go meditate. Like, what are you doing in your room? And why is that not selfish? And it's hard to explain. I've tried to my relatives in Idaho repeatedly, and it is sometimes vaguely successful. Actually, it's not really, is it? It never works. But Thomas Merton said that monastics are the center of around which the world turns. And I think that's a bit of monastic conceit there. How I think it is better perhaps said is that the practice of meditation, the still point, is around the center around which the rest of our lives turns. And even though it's the still thing that is so easily forgotten and overlooked and almost impossible to explain, it serves as the hub around which every other activity and aspiration coalesces and crystallizes. And it serves as the silent space in which the heart and the soul, or the soul is a problematic word in Buddhism, we'll say the heart-mind, has a chance to speak, because our quieter nature and our better voices sometimes come as lions, but more often it comes as a deer, and it speaks quietly and delicately to us. And if we remain fractured and distracted constantly, then it never has a chance to be heard, and we lose ourselves and our true potential in a confluence of comfort and convenience. And the conceit in the West that we don't suffer is a sign of someone who really hasn't looked at their experience, because we all suffer. And I think depression rates in suburban America or urban America they've done studies. I think a 2005 study found that depression rates in urban places in America compared with similar societies in Nigeria, depression rates were 6 times higher. Modern suburban life in America can be soul crushing in its own way, but not in an obvious way. It's more that there's a subtle sense, I think, that many of us have, that our true potential or need for meaning is not being met. And it's just a steady dilution of who we feel we are and what we feel we are capable of in this, in a life which is good, but at least for me, sometimes lacked the feeling that I was really living a life worthy of my death. And I think for me that culminated in, after college, I was driving down the coast, and throughout my college years, the need for distraction, just the running from my pain or from boredom, it was very simple things. I led a very blessed childhood, but it had really crescendoed. And I remember driving down the coast listening to podcasts, Top 40 radio. I read The Hunger Games. I watched a movie. It was Taco Bell. I was looking into grad schools, but it was a constant just need for more. And then I stopped at a monastery in our tradition called Abayagiri, north of California. And I was suddenly met with silence. And it was so obvious to me that I needed to turn towards whatever I was running from, because otherwise I would live always with this constant splinter of knowledge that I was not living the life I was supposed to follow. And this is refuge in the knowing, in the transcendent. It's the reestablishing a place every day in the meditation where that quieter and that quiet voice of majesty has a chance to speak in us and through us, and where we have a chance to solidify and ground ourselves such that we can bring intention to every other part of our lives and potentize every action through that, and turn every action into one more means of shaping our hearts towards becoming tools of care and compassion to those around us. But unless we establish that daily practice, that refuge in the transcendent, in the subtle, quiet, still part of ourselves, then that gets lost. And refuge in the Dhamma means provisionally refuge in the Buddhist teachings and such, but I think perhaps it can be also conceptualized as a refuge in truth. I do think looking at it through the Buddhist teachings, though, is useful here, because there was 2 teachings the Buddha said were categorical, which means they're appropriate to apply in every situation, and that's the 4 right exertions of preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning arisen unwholesome states, bringing into being wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and abandoning or cultivating and developing arisen wholesome states, and the 4 noble truths. And the 4 noble truths are really problematically translated as suffering, the cause, the cessation of suffering, and the path to that cessation, which is the Eightfold Path. But I think much more helpfully, it's good to look at what the Buddha said to do with each of those truths. So there's a directive, a task, and it is to turn towards and comprehend our suffering, to abandon its cause, which is craving, to realize peace, and to develop the path to peace. And it's interesting to look at how a teaching on suffering can be a refuge, And yet what it does is there's no neutral stance towards suffering. There's a story of Chogyam Trungpa with a teacher, a problematic teacher. But there's a really good story of him walking into a Tibetan monastery and being charged by a Tibetan mastiff that broke its chain. And the whole entourage of Tibetan monks he was with ran away. But Chogyam Trungpa ran straight at the mastiff, and it freaked the mastiff out so much it ran away from him. And this is how it is with our suffering, is there's no still point. Either we're running away from it without knowing, or we're very consciously, with careful hands, turning towards our pain and touching it. But there's no neutral stance. It's one or the other. And so what the First Noble Truth allows us to do is turn towards that with all these tools laid down of practice, of meditation, of ways of brightening the mind and heart and giving ourselves strength to do that. There was a teaching I really love. Basically, a teacher was talking about the First Noble Truth in Sandpoint, Idaho, and a man chimed in and he said, "Oh, it's like telephone poles." And this teacher said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I used to work installing telephone poles." And the foreman said, "If one of these falls, what do you do?" And the man answered, "Well, you run." And the foreman said, "No, what you want to do is get as close to it as you can and put your hands on it, because then you can feel exactly how it's moving." And that's our stance towards suffering in the Buddhist teaching. You put your hands on it and you feel it carefully, and you rely on teaching and your practice and your friends and your Sangha to hold you through that palsied shaking until you can let it go and acknowledge that it's not a problem in the same way. But to do that, we have to turn towards it. And what this does and why it's a refuge is that it turns suffering from something we run from into a catalyst and a part of the path, so that every difficult experience becomes one more step on the path of purifying our heart, one more means by which we are shaped into something truly worthy of our highest potential. A famous teacher in our tradition named Longpor Liam, Ajahn Liam, said that there are no obstacles in practice, only worthy adversaries. Mm-hmm. And I remember this. I was at a monastery where there was one monk who just would admonish me for everything: how I closed the door, how I talked too loud, pretty much everything, and constantly. And what could have been a really terrible living situation, and was difficult, but I decided to take him on as my teacher, basically, and use everything that I could from that to develop patient endurance and also just a refinement of conduct. Because if that was a great teacher telling me those exact same things, then I would have taken it as that, instead of some monk slightly senior to me who was kind of being a jerk. So, and that changed everything, because then a moment of suffering becomes one lesson on the path. And I think a beautiful way of thinking of karma is not this retribution for some past action, but rather showing us, teaching us the lesson of what our actions have done in good and bad, and letting us truly acknowledge that and letting it sink in, so that our compassion grows. And only by the heart being touched, and not always delicately, does it become tender enough to truly, the heart that hasn't been cracked has no place for others to enter. So that's the refuge, is if the world is no longer a place where we seek security, but rather a lesson and a journey on this path, then we are safe. But to do that, we also need the conception of our highest potential as our supreme goal, and that's the first refuge. And then the third refuge is the Sangha, which is what happens when that, traditionally it's the monastic Sangha, and especially the for awakened beings, basically. It's the awakened mind. But how I love, how I've heard a teacher put it that I really liked is, the first refuge is the untainted knowing, The second refuge, the Dhamma, is truth. And the third refuge, Sangha, is what happens when that knowing knows truth, when it becomes embodied. And I think that there's a lot of value in meeting teachers who are purified at that level. It shows you what a human being is capable of. I remember seeing my first video on YouTube of Ajahn Chah. You can look it up if you want. He's getting interviewed near a monastery in England. And he just shines. There's nothing, I'd never seen someone like that. I think I had the same reaction with Pema Chodron. Really, like her eyes, yeah. And you begin to meet people like that, and you realize that saints aren't these beings from 2,000 years ago in the Bible. They exist. And more than that, there's a very practical means of purifying your heart towards becoming something like that. And they're not perfect or in the sense of devoid of personality. They're touched with the same personality eccentricities as anyone. And yet there's no compounding of those into problems. The wrathful nature doesn't say become anger or hatred. It's just, even something like that, like a personality which is slightly cutting or something, might be a better way of putting it, doesn't become anything negative. It just becomes a mean towards helping others. And the greatest blessing of my life might have been that one of them might have been after entering robes, getting to meet men and women like that and realizing what we are capable of. And I remember being so starved for that before I ordained, and I wanted so badly to meet someone. So that's a beautiful gift. And there are teachers like that in the US, I think. And, but also just the sense on another level of Kalyan and Mitta, of a group of people like, you and Sharon has cultivated here in the Metao. We're not strong enough to do this on our own. You need others, and you need people to hold you. I think some people can do it on their own, but it's hard. And it's rare that people see it. The Buddha said those with little dust in their eyes are few. So to have come across a community that does acknowledge that and will hold you in that is something to hold as deeply precious. And I've been so heartened by the welcome that in the months coming up to the parents moving here and myself as well. There's just been a huge upwelling of support and welcome, and it's been such a gift to find that family here as well. So thank you for welcoming us all, and hopefully we see plenty of each other in coming years. So I think we have 15 minutes if people want to talk about anything, including anything.
Now, one quick question. Since this is YouTube live stream, will it be available later for other people to see also?
Yeah, so good question. So the website for the Seattle monastery, which I will probably be getting, is clearmountainmonastery.org, Clear Mountain Monastery, and it has a YouTube channel, Clear Mountain, and all the videos are on that. Usually I'll be streaming, so once again, we'll be doing retreats the last weekend of every month for 2 days for free, starting next month. And every Sunday morning here at 9:30 till 11:30, we'll be having the sort of potluck and teaching and gathering. For the next month and a half, I'll be here. After that, it'll be other monastics live streaming or teaching in person if they're staying there. Those talks will be on Cascade Hermitage, as will every talk following this. And that's the name of the place, the hermitage my parents are beginning here. So Cascade Hermitage, and cascadehermitage.org is the website, and they have a YouTube as well. So I forgot to stream to there today. So this will be on Clear Mountain, but after that, it'll be Cascade Hermitage.
Thank you so much for coming. I am a layperson following a different tradition, but I was really excited for you to come here.
Yeah, which tradition have you followed?
Korean Song,
Oh, do they have
Korean Zen.
a monastery nearby at all, or?
No, the nearest one is in Berkeley,
Okay,
and I participated in one in Arizona by Zoom.
great. Yeah, and I, one of the great things about coming back to the West is there is this wealth of traditions and quite a good family. So I got to stop by Deer Park of Thich Nhat Hanh, and we have a really lovely relationship with a lot of different monasteries nearby. So.
I'm sorry, we also do have a Zen Center in West Seattle.
Oh, West Seattle. Okay, good. Well, maybe I'll get to say hello to them when I move there. Okay.
What's that gonna look like, the 2-day retreat? How's that gonna operate?
Good question. We are working those out, the details. But the idea would be that Saturday morning. So all the details on this will be Cascade Hermitage and Clear Mountain's website. But the idea would be Saturday morning, maybe beginning at I think 9, maybe 8 for those who can make it. We basically we'll be here, and we'll have sessions of sitting, Dhamma talks. In the Thai tradition, there's a tradition of walking meditation as well, which is great if you have a really active character like me. Sitting for all days, it's a lot. So walking meditation dovetails quite well with sitting. So we do that, have a meal together. Usually the monastics, we can only eat before noon. So usually everyone would bring a meal and we'd share it maybe at 11 or 11:30. And here. And that'll be every Sunday as well. But for the 2-day retreat at the end of the month, that'll be here. Then we'll keep meditating and sort of having talks into about, I think, 4 p.m. Saturday. And then it will basically repeat on Sunday with the exact same thing, except that it'll end at 3 to let people get home if they need to. And if people can only attend one of those days, it's fine. We just wanted it to be an open thing, and all the teachings are offered freely. It's just, we're supported in mutual generosity, and you're most welcome, it'd be great to see everyone, so.
Can I ask, now that you're back, first of all, I have to tell you that I learned that you were coming from a friend of mine who lives in France.
That is very
From
strange.
her friend, a Bayagiri that met you and said you were wonderful, and she wanted to know all about you, and I knew nothing.
That is
so-
nice and also strange.
Really
That's
nice.
all right. All right, here you go.
But now that you're here, who will be your teachers?
So it's a really good question. So the Buddha, when he became enlightened, had that question. He said, I can't abide with no one as my teacher. So who do I take as a teacher? And he said, the Dhamma will be my teacher. Luckily, I'm not in that situation. I have a lot of people who can be my teachers. And so I have a really strong relationship with, there's a monastery called Abhayagiri, about 2 hours north of 2 hours north of San Francisco, in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And the abbot, or the sort of elder who founded it, who still lives there, is Ajahn Pasano. He's actually going to spend the summer at Pacific Hermitage near Portland. But he's one of the old guard. He's been ordained for 40 years. He ordained with Ajahn Dha. He's faced down tigers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm actually writing his biography, so I get all the good stories. And I've met very few beings like him. And if you get a chance to go to Pacific Hermitage when he's there, you should go if you can. It's 4 hours or 6 hours, but people can go their whole lives without encountering someone like him. And so he's a very good teacher and one of my guiding elders. I have a teacher named Ajahn Anand, who I ordained with, who is also a close disciple of Ajahn Chah in Thailand. He's quite well known, and he's known for his loving kindness. He's Thai. Ajahn Jayasaro is an amazing teacher in Thailand who I deeply respect. And then an important part of my monastic path has been we're a bit behind on some of my views around ordaining women don't completely align with that of some parts of my tradition. So I'm supportive of bhikkhuni ordination and really want to support my sisters in robes. So there are actually some really lovely nun communities. And Ayya Tusika down in Kurna Buddhist Vihar, she's one of the people I consider a guide. Venerable Thupten Chodron of Sravasti Abbey. It's a Tibetan abbey up by Newport. She has been one of my teachers since I was a layman. So yes, it's a very good question. And honestly, I'm finding interacting with people just here has been a huge, in the West has been a huge teaching, a lot. There's a lot to be learned when you emerge from your little monastic cocoon. So it's hoping to still learn from that.
Welcome.
Thank you. What's your name again?
I'm Janice.
Janice, okay.
Wanted to follow up on your answer to Janice when you said your views about ordaining women are not consistent with the views of your practice. Yes. What are the views? I keep hearing references. There are monks and there are nuns, and I don't know what the difference is in your tradition.
Yeah, I mean so the Buddha was hugely far ahead of his time. Not only was he kind of getting rid of the caste system in one go, but he was providing the first of all, he was the first teacher I know of that acknowledged the ability of both genders to awaken, which was enormous in India 2,500 years ago. But he also allowed, he created an order of bhikkhunis or nuns alongside that of monks. And there are beautiful verses uttered by these bhikkhuni elder nuns, and that lineage existed in India for quite a long time, then Sri Lanka. It got wiped out in those places at some point, but it continued in Korea. And I mean, it was really something because, like, for example, the Buddha allowed women who were aged 13 and married to ordain, but they could only ordain at that young if they were married because it was an escape from bad marriage, basically. So it was a very beautiful movement. And but in the Thai conception, the order got lost and ended there. And so there's been a lot of debate in recent years around restarting it. How do you do that? Can you do it? And some elements of my tradition, or the tradition I ordained in, don't think that's possible. So they've been trying to create other forms for women to ordain in. I personally do think it is possible, and I think and acknowledge the validity of that and want to support it as much as I can. So yes, that's the situation. And so it just means that I'm taking a slightly different route than some other monasteries in my tradition, and that's largely because I want to be a supporter of those sisters in robes, basically.
So in your monastery, there will be only men, only monks?
I don't know. I mean, it's basically usually the monasteries, even if they're hold both ordination lineages valid, will sometimes have like separate buildings for each or separate communities. I know that many of the bhikkhuni communities I've talked to appreciate that because it allows them to kind of come into their own without being under the shadow of a monastery that's been there ahead of time. I don't know exactly what will happen in terms of Clear Mountain in Seattle. So I'd be vaguely interested in a dual gender community in that way. But more than anything, I would like to just have it as a place where both ordination lineages are acknowledged and as equal and equally valid, and have a strong friendship with all the bhikkhuni communities I know. So, but I honestly, Clear Mountain is literally the idea of me shivering under a tree in Seattle right now, and a website. So I just don't feel able to speak to exactly what will happen more than that. Other than that,
Are there any dual gender?
there's currently there's Amravati, the dual gender monasteries I know of tend to have two, say, buildings that sort of self-govern, one for the nuns, one for the men, so that they have a chance to both develop on their own a bit, even if they're on the same plot of land. There are some I've seen try to have everyone under the same roof. Yeah, so it's Sravasti, yes. Although I think they only have, how many men do they have? One. Okay. So we're working this out, but it's the new generation kind of trying to, we're trying to hold to the beautiful parts of the tradition, and also I think some of us have different views than some of the more older generations. So I'm trying to hold both carefully and with respect, but hold true to my own ethic on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
I would have another question then if nobody else does. So you had a very elegant talk, and I was reminded while you were talking about the Bill Murray version of the movie The Razor's Edge. Have you seen that? It's based on a Somerset Maugham story.
I love Bill Murray, but
and you would love this movie. It was originally done in Tyrone Power, I think. But he achieves enlightenment at the top of the mountain.
Go Bill.
And please don't take this as a criticism, but he says, well, it's easy to be enlightened on the top of the mountain. And he descends the mountain and he goes back to his life. So how do you think in your community, in your Sangha, you bring the Dhamma to people outside of that Sangha?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a misconception of the monastic life as this sort of retreat into the forest. And it's true that we have times of retreat, but the Buddha laid down these rules for monastics. The fact that we can't touch money, we can't store food, we can't cook our own food, we can't ask for anything except water unless invited. We eat one meal a day before noon. And all that means that we have to rely on alms, which usually in most Buddhist countries and in Seattle when I'm there means that we walk for alms every day. And we are dependent on the unsolicited generosity of strangers. We can't beg, like in terms of imposing, but we walk. And in Thailand, there's a sense of distinction between begging and walking for alms, and that you're not trying to kind of wait and ask in that sense, but rather you're allowing those who want to give and who are inspired by that to give something. But the reason the Buddha made the monastic Sangha so helpless in those ways, and you would think it wouldn't work, but the Buddhist monastic Sangha is the oldest institution of humanity, apart from the Jains. They beat us by like a few years. So, but it's because it kept the monastics from cutting themselves off in a spiritual cocoon. They're dependent and have to interact every day with lay people, and they're accountable to those lay people for their conduct, for if they are providing something that the society sees as valuable. And so that's the most basic way. Is in Thailand, you see monks every day, and at least it's a symbol of something, of a spiritual path, and that's valuable. But the tradition, and most traditions I know, actually have a huge focus on communal living. And I found that to be as powerful as the meditation. It's one of the reasons the Ajahn Chah Sangha has grown so powerfully and serves, most Westerners who want to like run off into the forest and meditate, it does not go that well. So if they enter a community, my teacher would always say this, Long Prapasano, the one I referenced, he'd say, living with other people, it's terrible. but it's also the best thing in the world for cleaning your heart out completely. It just is hard. So living in community, and so these monasteries become not just communities of monastics together, but they become places where everyone can come and stay. And part of that whole ethic of offering the teachings for free is that, like, you can just stay at Abhayagiri for as long as you want, as long as you're not crazy and they see that. And it's free, and you can sleep there. And so these, and then the monastics offer teachings as well. So there's a sense of refuge. And it's true that at the beginning, just like you wouldn't begrudge a medical student 8 years of training, 10 years of training before you had them go operate, that is the ethic for new monks, is you or bhikkhunis as well, is you pull in and you spend more time on retreat. But especially if some of the teachers I've known who've achieved something in their hearts of unshakability, they just give constantly. That's all they do. The monk I referenced before, Ajahn Liam, Ajahn Chah would start at 6 a.m. and just teach until 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. Ajahn Liam, the current head of the Ajahn Chah tradition, he would do the same. And then he would pretend to go to bed underneath. He slept in a little tent underneath his kuti, underneath his little monastic hut. And he would sort of, after 10 p.m., he would pretend to go to bed so that his assistant could go to bed. And then he would get up and people would just find him like fixing a pipe somewhere in the monastery, And so the power of the purified heart and of a mind that is imbued with strong samadhi is pretty difficult to conceive of if you haven't seen it. But someone like that can enter back into the world and be unshaken by it. And that is refuge. And so it's true at the beginning, there is a bit of conventional pulling back, and that's important to keep retreat, I think, for monastics and laity. But there's also giving back in that. And if someone's achieved that final state, then, then they can do what they want and be unshaken by that. So. I'm not there yet. I'm just little bits.
Do you hold to a particular diet?
I try to be vegetarian. In our lineage, though, as an alms mendicant, and the Buddha didn't make his Sangha, the monks, vegetarian, because I think he wanted them to be able to go places that were mainly meat-based diets, like Tibet. It's really hard to be vegetarian in Tibet centuries ago. And so I think he thought that those people deserve to hear the Dhamma as well. And so I try to be vegetarian, but for example, in Seattle, I'll be mostly relying on alms. And so I'll probably, in order to, basically live, will be eating what people give me, unless there's enough at some point that I can eat vegetarian more or less. But yeah, there's a certain amount of compromise as an alms mendicant in that
What
way.
do you do if somebody puts a hot dog in your alms?
I probably eat it. And to be honest, I really like hot dogs, so it's not so bad. I've actually walked Tudong before, so it's where we walk on faith, and you just take what you get. And I've done it outside of LA and stuff. And yeah, sometimes you get I think one day I got sometimes you don't get enough. You get a pack of Rolos and a piece of puffy bread. But then other days you get 7 donuts. And then some days you get a cheeseburger. And yeah, you're really hungry. So, and it's a gift of generosity. The generosity is more valuable. It's this could be someone's only chance to give to a Sangha member. And to refuse them because it doesn't meet your dietary standards it's not okay as an alms mendicant. So generosity is held higher than the purity of the food in the vegetarian sense at that level.
So who's going to fix your food at the monastery?
Well,
Visitors and people that are lay people?
Well, when I'm here with my parents, we aren't establishing a completely daily alms round, so they'll probably make some stuff for me, hopefully. But I once again, we are hoping to go alms at the farmer's market on Saturdays at 10 a.m. And I would like to rely on alms that day. We'll see, but I think that would be a beautiful thing. In Seattle, my hope is to just really rely on alms because there I'm going to be able to be very regular about it. Then people get to know, the monk's here. And you go through hungry days, but people get it. They come and they do offer food. And there's good people everywhere, and it's miraculous, but it works. We have had a monk walk on faith for 3 years running on the East Coast, and you go hungry some days, but what he ended up saying after those 3 years was, Donna, generosity is never predictable, but it is reliable. So it works, you know.
Makes sense.
I think that's a better time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, really. Yeah. And if you do want to touch base with the parents around their whole project and such, it's cascadehermitage@gmail.com is the email, and cascadehermitage.org. So just to plug that one.
Or you can
Yeah,
ask
and I'll
any
keep that
questions.
on our weekly email.
Thank you, Sharon. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the welcome. It's a lot to take in, so it's appreciated. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Is this the first time you guys have really had a large meditation gathering?
Before COVID, before COVID.